Miriam sat by the window of the small hospital bedroom, watching the raindrop race down the glass as her mind raced just as fast. The machines monitoring her husband's vitals blended with the distant sound of the rain. But for Miriam, it was all white noise. She hadn't slept in days, and her body ached from sitting in the same position for hours on end. But there was no room for rest, not when her world was crumbling around her. Her husband, Tunde, lay in the bed beside her, his body so still that if it weren't for the steady rise and fall of his chest, she could have believed he was already gone. He had been the picture of strength, her rock, the love of her life, but now he was a frail shadow of the man she had once known. His once warm, lively eyes were now closed, and his laughter, the sound that used to fill their home, had been replaced by the constant beeping of the heart monitors. Tunde's condition had been diagnosed 6 months earlier, and it had turned their lives upside down. What had begun as mild discomfort in his chest had spiraled into something far worse. The doctors had identified a rare heart condition, one that required an immediate and incredibly expensive surgery. A surgery that could only be performed abroad by a specialist. They had sold everything they owned, every piece of jewelry, the car, their modest apartment, and yet it still wasn't enough. Miriam had tried everything. She had gone to friends, to family, even borrowed from distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. She worked multiple jobs, barely getting by just to keep the bills paid. But no matter what she did, the money wasn't enough. The deadline for Tunde's surgery hung over her like a heavy weight, growing more unbearable with each passing day. As she stared out at the rain-soaked world, Miriam felt the walls closing in on her. How much longer could she hold on before everything came crashing down? The truth was, she had exhausted every option, every single one, except one: Otunba. The thought of him made her stomach churn, but it was undeniable. He was the last hope she had, and even that hope was tainted. For years, she had resisted him. Otunba was a very wealthy businessman, a man whose name opened doors across town. But he was also a man whose reputation came with whispers of darker dealings. He had grown up in the same neighborhood as Miriam, and she had known him since childhood. As his wealth and influence had grown, so had his interest in her. Otunba had pursued Miriam for years, even before she married Tunde. Otunba had always made his intentions clear, leaving no doubt about what he wanted from her. He made her offers, threw money around her, tried to woo her with his powers and status, but Miriam had always stayed away, uninterested and even repulsed by the man. She didn't trust him, not his charms, not his wealth, and certainly not his motives. But now, her desperation was greater than her fear. That night, after the hospital had grown quiet and the nurses had made their final rounds, Miriam found herself sitting in the dark, staring at her phone. Otunba's number was saved there, a relic of the days when he used to call her, trying to convince her to join him for dinner or a trip out of the city. She had never answered those calls, but tonight, things were different. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She felt a knot in her stomach, and her hands felt heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. Miriam had always promised herself she would never need Otunba's help, She had always believed that love and hard work could solve any problem, and she and Tunde would get through this together. But now, she looked at her husband's weak form. She realized she had been wrong. Swallowing hard, she pressed the call button. Greng greng. He rang twice before his voice came through, smooth and deep, just as she remembered. Miriam, Otunba said. He sounded slightly amused. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? She closed her eyes, fighting the nausea that rose in her throat. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Otunba chuckled softly. Help? Now that's interesting. You've never wanted my help before, why now? I don't have time for games, Otunba, Miriam said, her voice firmer than she felt. My husband is dying. He needs surgery, and I don't have the money. You are the only one who can help. Everywhere was silent for a moment, and then Otunba's voice softened. I see. Well, it's been a long time since we've had a proper conversation, Miriam. Let's meet tomorrow. My hotel, noon? Before she could respond, the line went dead. The next day, Miriam stood in front of the fancy hotel where Otunba had asked her to meet. The glass door sparkled in the sunlight, and the tall building made her feel tiny. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she stepped into the lobby. Otunba was waiting for her in the penthouse suite, as she knew it would be. The luxury of the room was overwhelming. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and an expansive view of the skyline of the city. But all Miriam could focus on was the man sitting comfortably on the couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand and a knowing smile on his face. Miriam, he greeted her warmly, standing up and extending his arm as if they were old friends. It's been too long. She ignored his outstretched arms, standing stiffly in the doorway. I am not here for pleasantry, Otunba. You know why I came. He chuckled and gestured for her to sit. Of course. Always so direct. That's what I've always liked about you. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving hers. So tell me, how much do you need? Miriam swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak the words that had been eating her away. Tunde needs surgery in London. We've already raised some money, but we are still short by nearly 15 million naira. Otunba raised an eyebrow, swirling his whiskey in his glass. 15 million, is it? Quite a sum. He took a sip, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably in the room before continuing. And you've come to me for this. After all these years, you finally need me. Haha. I had no other choice, Miriam replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside her. If there was another way, I wouldn't be here. He smiled, a slow predatory smile. I admire your honesty, but you know how these things work, Miriam. Nothing comes for free. Her heart sank because she knew exactly what was coming, and the weight of her decision pressed down on her chest like a vice. What do you want from me, Otunba? She asked, even though she already knew the answer. Otunba set his glass down on the table and stood, walking over to her where she sat. He reached out, gently lifting her chin so that she was forced to look into his eyes. I've wanted you for a long time, Miriam, and you know that. You've known it since we were young, and now it seems like fate has brought you to me. Miriam's stomach twisted with revulsion, but she kept her face expressionless. One night, he said softly, just one night with me, and I'll give you the money you need to save your husband. No strings attached. She wanted to scream, to tell him she would never sell herself like this, that she would find another way. But there was no other way. Tunde's life was hanging by a thread, and she was out of time and also out of options. Miriam closed her eyes, the weight of her decision crashing over her. She had always believed that she could fight for what was right, that love and dignity would carry her through even the darkest times. But now, she was faced with an impossible choice. "I'll do it," her voice barely audible. Otunba's smile widened. "Good. I'll have the money transferred to your account by tomorrow morning, and you will have your husband's surgery. But first, tonight, Miriam." His voice trailed off as he ran a hand through her hair, his touch making her skin crawl. "Tonight, you are mine." The night passed in a blur of shame and guilt. Miriam lay beside Otunba in the dark, her body numb, her mind spiraling as she tried to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. She had done it for Tunde, for the man she loved more than anything in the world. But no matter how many times she repeated that to herself, the weight of what she had done suffocated her. The next morning, Miriam left the hotel without looking back. True to his word, Otunba had transferred the money to her account, and within days, she had arranged for Tunde's surgery. They flew to London, where one of the world's top heart surgeons performed the operation. The doctors assured her that the surgery was a success, and for a brief moment, Miriam allowed herself to feel hope again. But then, the nightmares began. It all started with restless nights. Tunde would toss and turn, his face contorted in pain even as he slept. Then came the vivid dreams, nightmares so intense that he would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. He spoke of dark figures, of shadows that followed him, whispering things he couldn't understand. At first, Miriam tried to reassure him, telling him that it was just the stress of his recovery. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. One night, as she sat by his bedside, Tunde woke up startled, his eyes wide with fear. He reached out and grabbed her hand, his grip tight and desperate. "Miriam," he whispered, his voice shaking. "What have you done?" Her heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Tunde's gaze was distant, as though he were looking at something far beyond the walls of the room. "I feel it," he said, his voice low and hollow. "Something dark is following me. It's like I've been marked." Miriam's stomach twisted with guilt. She had hoped that her decision to sleep with Otunba would remain her secret, that she would carry the burden of it alone. But now, it seemed that the consequences of her choice were greater than what she had imagined. In the following weeks, Tunde's health began to decline again. The doctors were baffled. By all accounts, the surgery had been a success. There was no medical explanation for why his condition was worsening. But Miriam watched her husband grow weaker with each passing day. She knew this wasn't a problem that could be solved by science. Desperate for answers, Miriam turned to the spiritual world. She visited pastors, healers, and anyone who might be able to explain what was happening. Eventually, she was led to an old woman, a diviner who lived in the outskirts of the city. The woman was ancient, her eyes clouded with age, but her voice was strong and filled with knowledge beyond this world. "You've made a deal," the old woman said, her voice low and grave. "A dark deal, and now the spirits have come to collect what they are owed." Miriam's heart raced. But I didn't make any deal with any spirit. I only made a deal with a man." The woman shook her head. "Otunba is no ordinary man. The power he wields comes from a place far beyond our understanding. And now, the spirit demands payment. Miriam felt sick. How do I stop this? How do I fix it? There is no easy way, the diviner replied. The spirit will not rest until they have taken what they are owed. You cannot simply walk away from a deal like this. The only way to free your husband is to offer them something of equal value. Miriam's blood ran cold. What do you mean, ma? The old woman looked at her, her eyes filled with a sorrow that Miriam had never seen before. You must offer your own soul, Miriam. It's the only way. Miriam returned to the hotel where she had met Otunba, her heart pounding in her chest. She had hoped that she would never have to see him again. But now, it seemed that he was the only one that could undo the damage he had caused. Otunba was waiting for her in the same penthouse suite, his smile as cold and predatory as ever. I was wondering when you'd come back, he said, standing up as she entered the room. You didn't think you could get away with this so easily, did you? Miriam's hands trembled as she faced him. I need to undo the deal. Tunde's life is falling apart. He is dying. Otumba's eyes gleamed with amusement. There is no undoing the deal once it's made, Miriam. But he paused, and his smile widened. I can offer you a new deal, though. What do you want from me this time? She asked, even though she thought she already knew the answer. Otumba stepped closer, his voice whispered as he spoke. You, Miriam, you, forever. Give yourself to me, body, soul, and mind, and I'll release Tunde from the spirit's grasp. Miriam hesitated. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had already sacrificed so much, already given away a piece of herself that she would never get back. But as she thought of Tunde lying down in that hospital bed, fighting for his life, she knew there was no other choice. I'll do it. I'll do it, she whispered as her voice was breaking. Otumba's smile was triumphant. Then it is done. The next morning, Tunde woke up feeling stronger than he had felt in months. The shadows that haunted him were gone, and his body was no longer weak. He had been given a second chance at life. But Miriam, she was gone. She had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving her life, her soul, to save a man she loved. Tunde would live, but the price of that life was the woman he had once loved more than anything in the world. This story emphasizes that desperate choices, especially the ones that involve compromising your values, can lead to tragic outcomes. And sometimes, the price of love is too high to pay. It also illustrates the dangers of making deals with forces we do not fully understand. I hope you have enjoyed this story and learned one or two things. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in the next one.